Scott Grayson was there inside the locker room following the game. He has Grayson's Grades right now. And he, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And he joins us on 97.3 ESPN. Scotty, what's up, my man? How was, what was it like in that locker room after the game? I know a lot of underdog masked around, but I would have to assume there's a lot that you saw that maybe a lot of the fans did not get a chance to witness.
Yeah, I mean, a ton of smiles, of course, a lot of excitement within the locker room. And, you could tell that there's something meaningful taking place because, guys weren't trying to bust out of there in a hurry to go be with their families. They were all, staying around for a long time, talking with the media, happy to, get out there, some of that underdog talk and how they overcame all that and how they thanked everybody for counting them out. Yeah, I mean, it was excitement, but it was more, it was just a lot of that, but also back to the same mentality they've had. Like they knew they could enjoy that. They had a little bit more time than normal to enjoy it because they had to wait to find out who their opponent was going to be. But, they all knew that it was going to be back to business as usual come today when they were going to get back in the facility and start getting ready for the NFC Championship game.
Anything stand out from any of the guys? I know you're talking to a bunch of guys after the game. We even, listening to all the audio here that you sent us. Chris Long, Lane Johnson, Brandon Graham, Jason Kelsey, Jalen Mills, who had the big play there, Zach Ertz. Any one comment or moment after that game stand out to you?
Two things stood out to me. I'll give you two. One was just the reality and the realization that none of them were taking this for granted. The older guys talking about how, like a Jason Kelsey, early in my career, he played in a playoff game, kind of thought this might happen more frequently, and it didn't. And he's embracing and understanding that, you got to take these when they come and enjoy them for what they are. You can't look past them too quickly. So there's that. There's guys like, Zach Ertz was saying a lot of the similar things in that regard. Malcolm Jenkins, they know that you don't get to an NFC title game frequently. So when you get there, you got to take advantage of the opportunity. The other thing that really impressed me, and this perhaps I think even more, was the way that the Eagles defenders knew exactly what play the Falcons were running on 4th and 2. Or 4th and goal from the 2. They knew it was coming. They knew it was a rollout to the right. They knew that they were going to look for Julio Jones, and they were talking about it before the ball was snapped. There was all that communication, guys telling Jalen Mills, it's coming at you, be ready. And all that comes down to, and really impressed me with the kind of preparation they had during the week, the film study, to have known and pick up on that and been ready for it. And the veteran leadership in the defensive backfield, Malcolm Jenkins hollering that out to everybody. The fact that they knew that in that kind of a key situation for how big that play was, it really said a lot to me about maybe even more about the preparation behind the scenes that this coaching staff has done, and maybe the fact that they need, more praise than they've gotten.
Well, you gave Doug Peterson and Jim Schwartz an A, and it sounds like, the preparation is part of the reason why.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it from the Rams, right? I mean, they looked like they weren't prepared when they played the Falcons. They looked like they weren't ready. And, you can say it's on the players. They have to go out there and perform, but it really is on the coaches and the staff before, the week leading up, because that's when, and this team has admitted it, when they've had poor weeks of preparation, they've gone out and lost. And I think those two guys deserve a lot of the credit for the way that they had these guys ready to play. And Schwartz's name's been mentioned as a guy who's been a head coaching candidate. There's been the opportunity for distractions, and they haven't let it happen. And I think it starts with those guys, trickles down to the players, and you see the result on the field come game day.
Scott Grayson's Grades here on the Boardwalk Hotline, Boardwalk Honda Hotline. I said Fletcher Cox to me wrecked that game. You wrote that he was a complete nightmare for the Falcons. Give us some more indication, because you were there and you get a chance to see him, from the press box there. He dominated that game.
Yeah, I mean, he blew up the middle, and that's right. I mean, that's the first domino that falls in the offensive line for Atlanta, and then everything else kind of happens around it. Now, usually he has that kind of an impact, and it's the other guys who are getting credit for the tackles and everything. But they couldn't stop him, and he was making big plays, tackles for losses. I mean, he was getting in there and causing a lot of havoc. And when Fletcher Cox is doing that and recording the tackles, I mean, you can imagine how much easier it makes the job for everybody else. And I thought, you look at both sides of the ball, starting with Fletcher Cox on defense, but the lines, they controlled the tempo at the line of scrimmage both ways, and it made the difference in the game, I thought.
If I were to tell you, Scott, that the Eagles would only end up with 96 yards rushing, do you think they win the game?
Not if you told me they had that Ajayi had 49 in the first two. Or was it the first? You know, he had 49 early on. I think it was first quarter. If you told me he had 49 and they only end up with 98, then I would have, or 96, I would have said, you know, they must have lost because they're throwing the ball a lot. But, you know, it was the way that they ran those 96 yards. I mean, right, the play to Nelson Aguilar, just a thing of beauty at a perfect time to call it for Doug Peterson. I prefer he didn't go to that well twice in the same game, but you know, he got a huge play out of it at the time. And Jay Ajayi doing his thing. The fumbling is my biggest concern with him. But, yeah, I mean, you know, what I think, you know, more than the rushing yards, it's more of what Nick Foles' stat line was, is what it needs to be if they're going to win this week, right? No touchdowns is fine. No interceptions is bigger, you know, and a high completion percentage. If he's doing that, then I think this team has a very good chance to get to the Super Bowl.
Scott, you know, also you look at Grayson's grades. How about Brandon Graham? You know, you might not see him in the stat sheets, but he seemed like he was wrecking havoc all over the field, causing hurries and pressure.
Yeah, and he had to move inside a little bit, and I think that's part of the reason that you didn't see as much stat-wise from him. It's almost like he and Fletcher Cox kind of flipped with the stat lines, but had the same effect that they normally do. And you're right, Brandon Graham deserved a lot of credit for what he was doing, both inside and outside, to kind of help create some of that havoc. And probably, you know, I'd have to go back and look at film, but I wonder if maybe the Falcons were looking to pay more attention to Graham, and that's how Cox was able to get some of his. You know, Graham has been a great player here, finally got paid there, I think, you know, last year, and it's really helped him. He got 9.5 sacks this year. I mean, the guy's been a huge key. And, you know, I would say this, Mike, I think this week, this Eagles defense is going to hear a lot of talk about the Vikings defense, and they're going to have a massive chip on their shoulder going into this game. Guys like Cox and Graham are going to lead that charge.
Yeah, it's interesting because nationally, I feel like the Vikings defense gets a lot more attention than the Philadelphia defense. Now, when you look at, you know, statistically speaking, total defense, they are Minnesota, that is. They are the number one defense, but it's not by a wide margin, right? I mean, their defense is very, very good, 15.8 points a game. The Eagles give up 18.4, but on the road, that's a big difference. Minnesota's defense is not as good points per game-wise on the road than they are at home. So I think you're right. I think Minnesota's defense will get a lot of this attention, but I thought the Eagles' defense was the best unit of all the games this weekend.
I would agree with that, and I thought that, you know, you look at it, and had they not had the crazy punt go off of Brian Bremen, and yeah, I don't know that the Falcons scored a touchdown.
And they had the Ajayi fumble.
The Ajayi
fumble led to the field goal, and then the botched punt led to the touchdown.
Right. I mean, they very easily could have shut out the Falcons this week, but because they gave up 10 points and it was a close game all the way down to the last play, everybody's kind of, you know, I think poo-pooing the Eagles' defense, and you're right, focusing more on the Vikings. But I thought they did play perhaps the most complete game defensively out of all the teams this weekend. You are absolutely right with that, and that's the kind of preparation and key. And, again, chip on the shoulder that I think they're going to carry into this game on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, the Jaguars' defense, which was, look, I don't think you could take anything away from what Jacksonville did. They scored 45. But that defense that everybody was talking about, that if they were going to beat the Steelers, it was going to be because their defense gave up 42. The Saints' defense got a lot of laud going in. They gave up 29, and Minnesota gives up 24 at home. I thought the Eagles, with the 10 points against that team, played the best game of the weekend out of everybody. Now, the Patriots, you know, they were just, you know, they beat the Titans, who just weren't ready for that moment. But for me, that was the best weekend. The best unit of the weekend was the Eagles' defense. Now, let me ask you real quick about Nick Foles. I really liked the game plan, and you covered the team in 13 when Chip Kelly was here. They went back and studied that tape, and they took some stuff from that tape and implemented it.
They did, and that's where I think the bye week was huge, because it gave Doug Peterson the time to devote to really studying what Foles did that was successful. And I think you saw it. I honestly, quite frankly, expected more screen passes in the game, and we saw more of them late in the game, but I thought that would be something that you know, Peterson might look to help get Foles going and loosen up the defense a little bit. Because, look, when you could see from high above where we were in the press box looking down, they did not show any respect to Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith even. They were playing man-to-man coverage on those guys because they felt like the Eagles were going to rely heavily on the run, and they were trying to sell out the stop, and they couldn't do it. I mean, that's just what Foles is going to have to do is these short completions that, he hit the slants to Alshon Jeffrey very well. And those kind of plays are going to be, in my opinion, what they're going to need to do more of. And you mix in the runs, you get the short passes, the screen passes. I think that's what we're going to see Sunday.
By the way, looks like some breaking news coming down. The Giants are expected to announce that Pat Shurmur will be the next head coach of the New York Giants, which is interesting because I tweeted out this morning that this could have been a really interesting game for him, almost like a job rehearsal to show the Giants how he will game plan against Jim Schwartz, who will have to face potentially twice. Shurmur was the guy I wanted the Eagles to hire when they decided to go with Peterson. We know that didn't happen. He ends up going to Minnesota, and now he'll go against potentially the Eagles as NFL Network reporting that the Giants are expected to hire Shurmur. So we'll see how that plays into the weekend. He'll have his team now ready to face an Eagles team that he coached for and will now have to potentially play twice a year. Scott Grayson will be at the NFC Championship game next Sunday night, and another edition of Grayson's Grades lives on. Scotty, great job, pal.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.